The sky over Arlington National Cemetery was a heavy shade of gray, as if the heavens themselves mourned alongside those gathered below. The cold November wind carried the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, rustling through the long rows of pristine white headstones stretching into the distance. Soldiers stood in silent formation, their faces unreadable, their dark uniforms crisp, despite the drizzle that clung to the fabric like grief itself. The sound of taps echoed through the vast cemetery, a lonely and haunting melody that sent chills down the spines of even the most hardened veterans. It was a song of farewell, of sacrifice, of promises left unfulfilled. 6-year-old Tyler Bennett stood at the front of the mourners, a small, fragile figure among giants. The folded American flag felt heavy in his hands, the fabric rough against his tiny fingers. He clutched it tightly, his knuckles turning white, as if afraid that letting go would mean losing the last piece of his father forever. But he did not cry. Not a single tear escaped his hollow blue eyes. His face was blank, eerily still, too composed for a boy his age. It was the look of someone who had already learned, too young, too soon, that the world was not fair. Beside him, a large German shepherd sat perfectly still. Max, his father's military service dog, had been Noah Bennett's loyal companion for years. The bond between them had been unbreakable, forged in war zones and sealed by unwavering trust. But now, Max sat beside an empty grave, his ears lowered, his head bowed, as if waiting for his best friend to return. Every so often, a soft whimper broke the silence, barely audible beneath the rhythmic patter of rain against polished wood. The dog's golden-brown eyes flickered between the casket and the small boy standing beside him, as if searching for an answer no one could give. Across the rows of mourners, Lucas Hayes stood near the back, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn leather jacket. He had been there since before the ceremony started, but he hadn't stepped forward, hadn't said a word. He had known Noah Bennett. They had trained together, fought side by side, bled on the same battlefield. And yet, Lucas had not been there in the end. That guilt clung to him like a second skin. Now, as he watched Tyler, a boy who had just lost his entire world, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in years. A stirring deep in his gut, something dangerously close to responsibility. But he shoved it down. He wasn't that man anymore. A sharp command pulled his focus back to the ceremony. The honor guard lifted their rifles. 3 shots rang out in perfect succession, each one piercing the air like a blade. Tyler didn't flinch. Max, however, let out a low, mournful whine. Then came the final moment. A young officer knelt before Tyler, his movements precise but gentle, as he presented the folded flag with solemn respect. His voice was calm, rehearsed, but there was a flicker of something real in his eyes. On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, we present this flag for the honorable and faithful service of Captain Noah Bennett. Tyler's small hands reached out, grasping the flag as though it were a lifeline. For a moment, everyone held their breath, waiting for a reaction. A sob, a tear, a sign of acknowledgement. But Tyler only nodded, clutching the flag to his chest and staring straight ahead. The boy was drowning in silence, and no one knew how to save him. 3 days later, the social worker arrived. Tyler sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the duffel bag beside him. His small fingers traced the worn leather strap of his father's wristwatch, the ticking sound, the only noise in the otherwise silent room. The house felt empty now, a shell of what it had once been. There were no more footsteps in the hall, no more laughter drifting from the kitchen, no more strong arms lifting him into the air after a long day. His mother had left years ago, unable to bear the loneliness of being a soldier's wife. And now, with his father gone, there was nothing left. A knock at the door, The woman who stepped inside was kind-looking, with tired eyes and a gentle smile. Mrs. Callahan. "Tyler, sweetheart, we have to go soon." Tyler said nothing. She sighed, kneeling in front of him, her voice soft. "I know this is hard, but we're going to find you a good home, okay? A place where you'll be safe." Safe. The word meant nothing to him. Safe was having his dad tuck him in at night, whispering stories about heroes and faraway places. Safe was falling asleep to the sound of Max's steady breathing beside his bed. Safe was not this. The leash jingled as the officers led Max toward the door. The dog resisted at first, digging his claws into the hardwood floor, his head snapping toward Tyler. For the first time, the boy's expression cracked. "No." The word was barely a whisper, but it carried more weight than any cry could. "He has to go too, sweetheart," Mrs. Callahan said gently. "Dogs like Max need special care. They'll find him a good place, I promise." Tyler shook his head. Max barked sharply, straining against the leash, his eyes locked onto Tyler's. A desperate plea, a promise unspoken. "I'm sorry, but we have to go now," the woman pressed. She reached for Tyler's hand, and the boy let go. Let go of the wristwatch. Let go of the house that no longer felt like home. Let go of the last pieces of a life that had shattered too soon. And he walked away. Max's howls echoed long after the door shut behind him. The house stood abandoned and silent for days after that. But every night, when the world grew dark and still, a lone figure could be seen pacing the front porch, scratching at the door, whimpering at the window, waiting. Neighbors whispered about the dog who refused to leave. "He's been at it for days now," Mr. Peterson murmured to his wife, peering out the window at the German shepherd sitting alone in the rain. "That poor thing is still waiting for him to come home?" The calls to animal control came soon after, and when the officers arrived, Max didn't fight. He didn't bark, didn't snarl, didn't resist. He simply lowered his head, his tail tucked between his legs, and let them lead him away. But even then, as they closed the doors of the van, Max's golden eyes never left the house, as if he already knew, as if he was silently promising, "I'll find you, Tyler. No matter how far they take me, I'll find you." Lucas Hayes had mastered the art of being alone. For the past 3 years, he had lived in near isolation, tucked away in a remote cabin at the edge of the woods, far from the noise, the questions, the ghosts that never stopped whispering in his mind. The days blended together in a monotonous routine. Wake up, chop wood, fix whatever was broken in the house, ignore the nightmares, and pretend he wasn't waiting for something or someone. But the silence was never truly empty. It was filled with the echoes of old orders shouted across a battlefield, the distant hum of helicopter blades, the ringing in his ears that never quite faded after the last explosion that took his team down. And Noah Bennett's voice. "Get home safe, Hayes. Somebody's got to keep an eye on you." Noah had been the kind of man who carried light in his soul. Steady, unshakable, the kind of soldier people followed without question. Lucas had trusted him with his life. But now, Noah was gone. And Lucas hadn't been there to stop it. His grip tightened around the coffee mug in his hands as he stared out the window, watching the mist roll over the trees like slow-moving ghosts. That was the thing about war. It never truly ended. The battlefield just changed, and Lucas had long since given up fighting, or at least he thought he had. Until the phone call came. The shrill ring of the landline shattered the silence, pulling Lucas out of his daze. He almost didn't answer. No one called him, but something about the way the sound sliced through the quiet made his pulse quicken. He picked up the receiver, his voice gruff from disuse. "Hayes," a woman's voice responded, professional but tinged with something else. Hesitation, maybe regret. "Mr. Hayes, this is Dr. Emily Carter from the Fort Bragg Military Veterinary Center. I'm calling about Max." Lucas stiffened, his free hand curling into a fist. Maximum. Noah's dog. The last living piece of a man who had once been his brother in arms. We found your information in his records. You were listed as his secondary contact in case something happened to Captain Bennett. Lucas's jaw tightened. I haven't spoken to Noah in years. What do you want from me? There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Dr. Carter sighed. Max hasn't been doing well since Noah passed. He refuses to eat. He barely sleeps. He keeps trying to escape the shelter. He's already run off twice. If we don't find him a home soon, we may have to... She hesitated. Lucas knew what she wasn't saying. Dogs like Max, military-trained, fiercely loyal, and deeply bonded to their handlers, did not adjust well to life without purpose. If they didn't find a new one, their future was bleak. He needs someone familiar, Dr. Carter continued. Someone who understands him. Lucas ran a hand down his face. You're asking the wrong person. I don't think I am. Her voice was softer now, the professional tone giving way to something more human. I know who you are, Mr. Hayes. I know what you and Noah went through together. I know why you left everything behind. But I also know that Max won't survive much longer if he stays in that shelter. He doesn't belong there. He needs a home. Lucas exhaled slowly, staring at the old wooden floorboards beneath his feet. I'm not a home, Doc. He hung up before she could argue. But even as he slammed the phone back onto the receiver, a pit settled in his stomach. Because for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he'd buried long ago. A sense of duty. The storm rolled in just past midnight. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the kind of low, growling sound that made the trees tremble in the wind. Rain lashed against the tin roof, filling the cabin with an eerie rhythm. Lucas sat in the dark, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table beside him. He wasn't drinking to forget tonight. He was drinking because he couldn't stop remembering. Then, over the sound of the rain, a noise he wasn't expecting. Scratching. Soft at first, then more insistent. Lucas frowned, setting the glass down and reaching for the knife strapped to his boot. Old habits died hard. When he opened the door, the sight that met him stole the breath from his lungs. Maximum. Soaked to the bone, paws caked in mud, fur matted from the storm. The German shepherd lifted his head, golden brown eyes locking onto Lucas's like he had been searching for him all along. Lucas cursed under his breath. You've got to be kidding me. Max didn't move, didn't whimper, didn't beg. He just stood there, waiting. Lucas glanced over his shoulder at the empty cabin, then back at Max. The dog's tail gave a hesitant thump against the wet wooden porch. Damn it! He stepped aside, just enough for Max to push past him into the warmth of the cabin. Max shook himself off, sending water droplets flying across the room. He made one slow lap around the small space before settling down beside the fireplace, his nose pressed against the worn fabric of an old army jacket Lucas had long since abandoned on the chair. Lucas swallowed hard. Noah's jacket. Max let out a small, content sigh, curling up beside it as if it was the only thing that made sense in this world. Lucas ran a hand through his damp hair and muttered, Guess you're staying then. The first few days were tense. Max followed Lucas everywhere, from the cabin to the woodshed, from the front porch to the lake behind the house. If Lucas moved, Max moved. But the dog never begged for attention. He just waited, like he was trying to figure out whether Lucas was worth staying for. And maybe, deep down, Lucas was doing the same. Then one night the nightmare came, the one Lucas could never escape, the one where he was back in the desert, sand in his mouth, gunfire cracking through the air, the one where Noah was calling his name, but no matter how fast he ran, he was always too late. Lucas shot up in bed, gasping. His hands shook, his chest ached, and then he felt it, a weight against his legs. He looked down. Max was sitting beside the bed, head tilted, watching him with an expression that was eerily familiar. The same way he used to watch Noah after a bad night. The tightness in Lucas's chest loosened, just a little. He reached out, hesitant at first, then rested a hand on the dog's head. Max leaned into the touch, and for the first time in years, Lucas didn't feel so alone. Lucas Hayes wasn't the kind of man who flinched at bad news. He had heard it all before. On crackling radios in war zones, in quiet hospital rooms where doctors avoided eye contact, in the voice of his commanding officer the day they told him the mission had failed. But this time, his stomach twisted in a way it hadn't in years. "It's about Tyler." Dr. Emily Carter's voice on the other end of the line was careful, measured, like she was afraid he'd hang up again. Lucas gritted his teeth. He could still say no, could still shove the past back where it belonged and pretend none of this concerned him. But then he glanced down. Max lay at his feet, ears twitching at the sound of the boy's name. His tail gave a small thump against the wooden floor. Waiting, just like before. Lucas ran a hand down his face. "Tell me." "He's shutting down," Dr. Carter said. "The social workers are trying, but Tyler won't talk, won't eat much. He hasn't spoken a full sentence in weeks." Lucas stared at the wall, fingers tightening around the phone. "And Holloway?" A pause. "Still has full custody." Lucas exhaled sharply. Of course they did. The system was built to protect the wrong people, and kids like Tyler. They slipped through the cracks. "You should see him, Lucas," Emily pressed. "Max is the last thing he had left of his father, and Max found you for a reason." Lucas shook his head, pacing the length of his small cabin. "I don't know the kid. I wouldn't even know what to say to him." "Then don't say anything, just show up." Lucas scoffed, like it was that easy. "You don't have to be his father," Emily continued, softer now. "Just be someone who doesn't walk away." Lucas went still. That hit deeper than it should have, because for the past 3 years, that's all he had done. Walked away. From his old life. From the team that never came home. From Noah. And now Noah's son was waiting for someone who wouldn't leave. Lucas glanced at Max again. The dog watched him, waiting for the next move. Lucas sighed, grabbed his jacket, and reached for his truck keys. It took an hour to reach the Holloway house, an old Victorian sitting just off the main road. The place looked too perfect, like something out of a magazine, with its fresh coat of pale blue paint and flower beds perfectly arranged along the walkway. But Lucas had been a soldier too long to trust the surface of anything. The place was too quiet. No toys in the yard, no laughter from inside, just a house, neat, lifeless. Max sat up in the passenger seat, his ears perking forward. His body was tense, tail flicking against the seat as he stared at the house like he already knew what was inside. Lucas killed the engine, shoving the door open. The moment his boots hit the pavement, Max leaped out, nose to the ground, moving fast. Lucas barely had time to react before the dog bolted up the walkway, heading straight for the side of the house. "Max, wait!" But Max wasn't listening. He knew. Lucas rounded the house just as Max stopped near a side window, letting out a low, deep growl. And then Lucas saw him. A small figure sat curled in the farthest corner of the room, half hidden by the drawn curtains. Tyler. The kid was thin, too small for his age, shoulders hunched forward. His fingers clutched the edge of his father's watch, twisting the worn leather strap over and over. Lucas didn't need a social worker to tell him the kid wasn't okay. The way Tyler sat, like he was trying to disappear, was all the proof he needed. Max let out a soft whine, tapping a paw against the glass. Tyler looked up. For a split second, his blue eyes flashed with something Lucas hadn't seen before. Hope. Then, before Lucas could react, the curtain snapped shut. Footsteps echoed from inside. The door flew open. And there stood Lisa Holloway. Her smile was too tight, her tone too sweet, like she had practiced the act for years. "Can I help you?" Lucas clenched his jaw. "I'm here to see Tyler." Lisa blinked, feigning confusion. "I'm sorry, but the social worker's already told us. He's not allowed visitors. We're trying to help him adjust." Lucas didn't buy it for a second. Neither did Max. The dog stood rigid at his side, eyes locked onto Lisa, tail held low, not wagging, not friendly. Watching, waiting. Lucas forced a smile. "Then let's call social services, see what they say." Lisa's expression flickered, just for a second. Then she stepped forward, lowering her voice. "I don't know who you think you are, but Tyler is our responsibility now. You need to leave." Lucas held her gaze. "I know what you're doing." Lisa's fingers tightened on the doorframe. Lucas took a step closer, lowering his voice to match hers. "You don't want me looking into you. But if you don't let me see him, I promise you, I will." Lisa inhaled sharply, her mask slipping just enough for Lucas to see the cracks underneath. She knew, and now she knew that he knew. Finally, after a long pause, she let out a fake laugh, stepping aside. 5 minutes. Lucas stepped inside. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. It was too clean, too staged, like someone had decorated it for visitors, not for the people actually living there. No toys, no photos of Tyler, nothing that made it a home. Tyler sat at the dining table, hands folded neatly in his lap, the same blank expression frozen on his face. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tyler, this man says he knows your father." No reaction. Lucas frowned. The kid wasn't just quiet. He was trained to be quiet. Lisa had done this. She had taught him to sit still, to say nothing, to make himself small. Lucas hated her for it. Lucas Hayes had made a lot of bad choices in his life, walking away from the people who needed him, leaving behind a war that never really left him, ignoring the ghosts that followed him home. But sitting in that pristine, lifeless dining room, watching Tyler Bennett press a shaking hand to Max's fur, Lucas knew one thing for certain. He wasn't walking away this time. Tyler wasn't just another kid lost in the system. He was Noah's son, the last piece of a man Lucas had once called his brother. And the way the boy sat there, shoulders curled inward, voice barely above a whisper, Lucas recognized that look. The look of someone waiting for disappointment. Of someone who had already learned the world didn't keep its promises. Lisa Holloway sat at the end of the table, watching them with cold, practiced politeness. "It's nice that you two have met," she said, her voice smooth. "But Tyler has a routine now. He needs stability. Constant reminders of his past aren't helping him move forward." Lucas glanced at Tyler. The kid wasn't moving forward. He was shrinking, getting smaller, quieter, disappearing into himself. "Yeah," Lucas drawled, leaning back in his chair. "And how's that working out for him?" Lisa's eyes flickered, just for a second, before she gave a tight-lipped smile. "He's adjusting." Lucas turned to Tyler. "That true, kid?" Tyler's fingers tightened in Max's fur. He didn't answer, didn't even look up. Lisa smiled wider. "See? He's fine." Max let out a low, warning growl. Lucas took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. This wasn't a battlefield. He couldn't just fight his way out. This was a different kind of war. A war against a system that didn't care. A war against people who knew how to hide behind paperwork and polite words. Lucas had spent his whole life fighting battles for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And Tyler? Tyler didn't just need a soldier. He needed someone who wouldn't leave. Lucas left the house that day without Tyler. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Back at his cabin, he spread out everything he had on Holloway. Police reports, financial records, foster care history. Jack Mercer, his old contact in private security, had dug up dirt Lucas didn't even know to look for. Lisa and Brent Holloway had fostered 8 kids in the last 5 years. None had stayed longer than 6 months. Every case ended with complaints about the children's behavior. Too aggressive, too difficult, too much trouble. All conveniently sent back into the system right after the state deposited their final stipend payment. Lucas clenched his jaw. They weren't parents. They were running a business. And Tyler? He was just another paycheck. Max lay on the floor beside the desk, ears perked as Lucas worked through the files. The dog hadn't left his side since they left Holloway's house. He knew, just like Lucas knew. This wasn't just about getting Tyler out. It was about making sure no other kid ended up in that house again. Lucas grabbed his phone. "Mercer, tell me you've got something I can use." Jack laughed, low and knowing. "Oh, I've got more than something. I've got enough to make sure Holloway never gets near a kid again." Lucas exhaled, gripping the edge of the desk. "Good. Now we just have to make sure we get Tyler out before it's too late." The storm rolled in just after midnight. Lucas watched from his truck, parked a block away from the Holloway house. Max sat in the passenger seat, ears flicking at every distant rumble of thunder. They had been waiting for hours. Lucas could feel it, the shift in the air, the moment before something happened. Then movement. A light flickered in the second-story window. Tyler. Lucas felt his chest tighten. The kid wasn't asleep. He was waiting, like he knew, like he was ready to run. Then suddenly, the window moved. Lucas's heart kicked hard against his ribs. "No! No, no!" Tyler wasn't waiting. He was climbing. The kid was trying to escape. Then his foot slipped. And before Lucas could react, Tyler fell. Max moved first. The dog was out of the truck before Lucas even got the door open, sprinting across the yard with a force Lucas had never seen before. By the time Lucas reached them, Max was already there, standing over Tyler, nudging the boy with frantic whines. Tyler wasn't moving. Lucas dropped to his knees, hands checking for injuries. "Kid," Tyler stirred. His blue eyes blinked open, unfocused at first, then locking onto Lucas, and Lucas swore. In that moment, he had never seen anyone look more relieved. "You came," Tyler whispered. Lucas's throat went tight. "Yeah, kid, I came." Footsteps. Lisa Holloway's voice, sharp and furious. "What do you think you're doing?" Lucas turned, shielding Tyler with his body as he stood. "Taking him with me." Lisa laughed, actually laughed. "You can't do that. He's in my custody. If you try anything—" A new voice cut in. "That won't be a problem." Lisa's face paled. Jack Mercer stepped out of the shadows, a folder in one hand and his phone in the other. "See, Lisa, we've got a little issue. Turns out when you take state money for fostering kids, you're supposed to actually take care of them." Lisa's smile cracked. "You have no proof." Jack grinned. "Oh, but we do." Behind him, 2 police cars pulled up. Lisa's eyes widened. Lucas didn't stay to watch her fall apart, because he was already lifting Tyler into his arms, carrying him to the truck. Max jumped in first, settling against the boy's side the moment Lucas set him down. Tyler curled into the dog's fur, finally safe. Lucas shut the door, slid into the driver's seat, and exhaled. He looked at Tyler, at Max, and for the first time in a long time, he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. The road stretched long and dark ahead, the hum of the truck's engine the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Lucas Hayes kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting on the worn leather of the armrest, eyes flicking every so often to the rearview mirror. Tyler Bennett sat in the back seat, curled against Max, his small fingers tangled deep in the German shepherd's thick fur. The boy hadn't spoken a word since they left the Holloway house. Not when Lucas carried him to the truck. Not when Max pressed close, his warm body a silent promise of safety. Not when Lucas told him, "You're coming home with me, kid." But the way Tyler clung to Max, how he buried his face against the dog's fur, how his small shoulders finally loosened, just a little. It told Lucas everything he needed to know. The boy didn't trust words. He trusted actions. Lucas exhaled, rolling his shoulders as the headlights illuminated the dirt road leading to his cabin. This was it, a place he had once chosen to disappear from the world. Now it had to become a home. Lucas pushed open the cabin door, the familiar scent of pine wood and rain-soaked earth drifting in from the storm outside. Tyler hesitated on the threshold. His small frame stiffened, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room, the old leather couch, the unlit fireplace, the wooden floors that creaked under weight. Lucas could see the calculation behind the boy's expression, assessing, judging, waiting for the first sign of trouble. Max trotted in first, shaking the dampness from his fur before circling back to Tyler, nudging his leg gently. That was all it took. With a slow step, Tyler finally crossed the threshold. Lucas closed the door behind them, his movements deliberate, careful, like handling something fragile that had already been cracked too many times. "All right, kid," he said, keeping his tone light. "You want the grand tour, or you just want to crash?" Tyler didn't answer. Instead, he walked past Lucas, silent and small, and lowered himself onto the couch. Max followed, jumping up beside him without hesitation, pressing his warm body against the boy's side. Tyler let out the smallest sigh, one that Lucas barely caught. The tension in the kid's shoulders finally eased. Lucas had seen soldiers return from war with less weight on their backs than this 6-year-old boy. And that realization hit harder than he was ready for. He cleared his throat. "You hungry?" Tyler's fingers twitched against Max's fur. A beat. Then a small nod. Lucas nodded back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "All right, let's fix that." Lucas wasn't much of a cook. He had lived alone for too long, existing on black coffee and meals that required no more effort than opening a can. But tonight wasn't about him. So he pulled out a pan, grabbed some eggs, and started scrambling. The soft sizzle of butter on the stovetop filled the quiet cabin. Tyler stayed on the couch, Max curled up beside him. But the boy's eyes flicked toward the kitchen, watching, not with distrust this time, with curiosity. Lucas worked in silence, moving slow, deliberate, giving the kid space but letting him see that there was no rush, no raised voices, no expectations. Just quiet. A different kind of quiet than Tyler was used to. Lucas set a plate on the worn wooden table and stepped back. "Eat as much as you want." Tyler hesitated. Then cautiously, he slid off the couch, moving toward the table with careful steps. Max followed, his nails clicking softly against the floorboards. Tyler climbed into the chair, small hands gripping the fork, and then, for the first time since they left Holloway's house, he spoke. "Max eats first." His voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used in days. Lucas blinked. "Max already ate, kid." Tyler frowned, looking down at his plate. Lucas exhaled, leaning against the counter. "But I bet he wouldn't mind keeping you company while you eat." Tyler studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, so slowly, he took a bite. Lucas didn't push, didn't say anything else. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching as Tyler finally ate something. After dinner, Lucas led Tyler to the small spare bedroom. It wasn't much, just a twin bed, an old dresser, and a window overlooking the backyard. Tyler stood in the doorway, his hands fisting the hem of his oversized hoodie. "This yours?" he asked softly. Lucas shook his head. "It's yours now." Tyler didn't move. Max brushed past Lucas, padding into the room before hopping onto the bed. Tyler's grip on his hoodie loosened. "He can stay?" Lucas nodded. "Yeah, kid, he can stay." Tyler climbed onto the bed, curling against Max's warm body. Lucas pulled the blanket up, hesitating for just a second before reaching out and gently smoothing it over the boy's small frame. Tyler's eyes stayed open, watching him, like he was waiting for something. Lucas kept his voice soft. "You're safe here." Tyler blinked. Then, barely above a whisper, "Okay." Lucas lingered for a moment before stepping back, clicking the bedside lamp off. Max's golden brown eyes gleamed in the darkness, watching Lucas with something that almost felt like approval. Lucas swallowed hard. Then finally he closed the door. The first few days were quiet. Tyler barely spoke, but he watched. Lucas could feel the boy's eyes on him as he worked around the cabin, fixing the fence, chopping wood, repairing the old truck that groaned in protest every time he started it. Max stayed glued to Tyler's side. Wherever Tyler went, Max followed. When Lucas was outside, the boy sat on the porch with Max curled beside him, watching. When Lucas sat at the table drinking coffee, Tyler sat across from him, staring at the steam rising from the cup. Lucas didn't push, didn't force conversation. Because trust wasn't built with words, it was built with time. And then, on the fourth morning, it happened. Lucas was working under the hood of the truck, cursing at the rusted engine, when a small voice spoke from behind him. "It's broken." Lucas stilled. He turned slowly. Tyler stood at the edge of the driveway, Max at his side. His hoodie sleeves were pulled over his hands, his fingers twisting the fabric. Lucas nodded. "Yeah, kid, it's real broken." Tyler hesitated. Then, in the smallest voice, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to ask, "Can I help?" Lucas felt something in his chest shift. "Yeah, kid, you can help." Tyler stepped forward. Max trotted after him. And for the first time, Lucas felt something he hadn't in years, something that felt dangerously close to home. The morning was crisp, the kind of autumn air that hinted at the coming cold, but still carried the warmth of golden sunlight filtering through the trees. The cabin sat quietly at the edge of the woods, its old wooden frame steady against the wind, as if it had always been meant to stand strong. Inside, Lucas Hayes poured himself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the small kitchen. At the table, Tyler Bennett sat, his small hands wrapped around a glass of orange juice, eyes flicking between Lucas and Max, who was stretched out on the floor beside him. The boy still wasn't much of a talker, but in the few weeks since he had arrived, something had changed. Lucas could see it in the way Tyler's shoulders weren't as hunched anymore, in how his fingers no longer twisted at the hem of his hoodie when he sat at the table. He was settling. For the first time in what was probably his entire life, he was beginning to feel safe. And that was everything. Lucas took a sip of coffee, watching the kid out of the corner of his eye. "You got a favorite breakfast yet, kid?" Tyler hesitated, then, quietly, "Pancakes." Lucas smirked. "Yeah? You know how to make 'em?" Tyler shook his head. Lucas shrugged, setting his coffee down. "Well, guess today's a good day to learn." For the first time, a small, uncertain smile flickered across Tyler's face. Lucas turned toward the stove, grabbing the ingredients. He didn't see the way the boy watched him, didn't see the way Tyler's fingers tightened around his glass, like he was afraid to hold on to something good. Because every time something had felt safe before, it had been ripped away. And Tyler knew, deep down, that nothing this good ever lasted. They had barely finished breakfast when Lucas's phone rang. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, frowning at the unfamiliar number. It had been a long time since he had received calls from anyone other than Jack Mercer or Dr. Emily Carter, and both of them had their names saved. Hayes. Silence. Then, a voice he hadn't expected. Mr. Hayes, this is Sarah Whitmore, attorney for Child Services. We need to talk about Tyler. Lucas's stomach dropped. Across the room, Tyler sat on the floor with Max, his small hands buried in the dog's fur, completely unaware. Lucas turned toward the back porch, stepping outside before lowering his voice. What's going on? Sarah hesitated. The Holloways are trying to overturn the emergency custody ruling. They're pushing for Tyler to be returned to them. Lucas's grip on the phone tightened. That's not happening. I know, Sarah said quickly, but legally they have a case. The foster system prioritizes returning children to their assigned guardians unless there's substantial proof of abuse. Lucas let out a slow, steady breath. We have proof. Mercer pulled up everything, records, financial reports, testimonies. We exposed them. It's not enough, Sarah admitted, frustration lacing her tone. Their lawyer is arguing that Tyler was traumatized when he was removed, and they're painting you as an unstable veteran with no parenting experience. Lucas's pulse pounded. He had expected them to fight. He hadn't expected them to fight this dirty. When's the hearing? He asked. Sarah exhaled. 3 days. Lucas's jaw set. 3 days. 72 hours to prove that Tyler belonged with him. That this wasn't just some temporary placement. That this was home. He ended the call and stepped back inside. Tyler looked up, his blue eyes cautious. He wasn't stupid. He knew something was wrong. Lucas forced a smile, reaching out to ruffle the boy's hair. You good, kid? Tyler studied him for a long moment. Then, softly. Yeah. But Lucas knew better. Because even as he turned away, Tyler's fingers gripped the sleeve of Max's fur a little tighter. Lucas had spent his life preparing for war. He knew how to fight, how to strategize, how to win. And this was a battle he could not lose. For the next 3 days, he and Sarah built their case. Jack Mercer dug deeper, pulling out more records, more names, more testimonies. Dr. Carter agreed to testify, to tell the court about how Tyler had shut down under the Holloway's care, how he had been nothing but a shadow of himself until Max and Lucas stepped in. Lucas wasn't good with words, but his actions spoke for themselves. He documented everything. Tyler learning how to fix the truck, how he had started helping with the firewood, how he had begun speaking more, smiling more, how for the first time he wasn't afraid. And when the day of the hearing arrived, Lucas was ready. The courtroom was cold, sterile, emotionless. Tyler sat beside Lucas, small and quiet, his feet barely touching the floor. On the other side of the room, Lisa and Brent Holloway sat, their lawyer whispering to them in hushed tones. The judge, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, called for silence. Let's begin. Lisa was the first to speak. She played her part well, tears in her eyes, voice trembling as she spoke about how she and her husband had done their best to care for Tyler. How he had been a difficult child, how they had been so worried when he ran away. Lucas's hands curled into fists. Then it was his turn. He stood, his voice calm, steady. Tyler didn't run away. Lisa's lawyer scoffed. Then why was he found outside, alone, in the middle of the night? Lucas exhaled sharply. Because he was trying to escape. Silence. Then Sarah stepped in. She laid out everything, the financial records, the testimony from past foster children, the pattern of placements conveniently ending right before stipend payments stopped. Then Dr. Carter spoke. When Tyler arrived at the shelter, he wasn't just grieving his father. He was disappearing. He wasn't eating. He wasn't speaking. He had completely shut down. She turned to the judge. Then Max found him, and he found Lucas. And in just a few weeks, that boy became himself again. If you take him away now, you'll break him all over again. The final moment came when Tyler was asked to speak. The boy hesitated, his small hands twisted in his lap. Then, softly, "I don't want to go back." The courtroom fell silent. Lucas held his breath. The judge studied Tyler for a long, long time. Then, finally, "Mr. Hayes." Lucas straightened. "Yes, ma'am." The judge's gaze softened. "Take him home." The air rushed out of Lucas's lungs. Tyler let out a shaky breath, and Max wagged his tail. Lucas reached down, ruffling the kid's hair. "Told you, kid. You're stuck with me now." And for the first time, Tyler grinned. The drive back to the cabin was silent, but not empty. Tyler Bennett sat in the passenger seat. Max curled protectively against him in the back, the dog's golden-brown eyes flicking between the road ahead and the boy beside him. Lucas Hayes kept one hand steady on the wheel, his other resting loosely on the armrest, stealing quick glances at Tyler every now and then. The boy was holding on to the court documents, the official proof that he wasn't just being borrowed this time. He belonged. He had a home. But even now, Lucas could see the war happening inside Tyler's head, because Tyler wasn't used to good things lasting. And that was something Lucas understood better than anyone. So, when he pulled the truck into the long gravel driveway, instead of announcing anything, he simply reached over and popped the glove compartment open. A small military challenge coin rolled into view, the same one Lucas had given Tyler the first day they met. Lucas picked it up, pressing it into the boy's palm. "That's yours now, kid." Tyler stared at it, his fingers curling around the cold metal. Lucas watched him for a beat, then smirked. "You comin', or you planning on moving into my truck?" For the first time, Tyler laughed. It was small, barely there, but Lucas felt it like a punch to the chest. And suddenly, finally, Lucas knew. He hadn't just won a custody case. He had won his son. Lucas was out by the truck, cursing under his breath as he tried to fix the damn radiator, while Max was stretched out in the shade, watching the world with lazy contentment. Tyler sat on the porch, drawing. Lucas had found an old notebook and some colored pencils buried in a closet and had tossed them on the table like it was no big deal. He hadn't expected Tyler to use them, but there the kid was, completely lost in whatever world he was creating. Lucas wiped grease from his hands, heading toward the porch. "What you working on, kid?" Tyler didn't look up. Instead, he held up the page. Lucas blinked. It was a drawing of the cabin. And on the porch, 3 figures. One man, tall and broad, one boy, small but steady, and one dog, standing between them like a protector. Lucas's throat went tight. Tyler glanced up, eyes cautious. "It's us." Lucas swallowed. Then, rough but gentle, "Yeah, kid, it is." Tyler smiled. And Lucas? Lucas finally let himself believe that this was forever. It took a few months before Tyler was ready, before he finally asked to visit his father's grave. Lucas didn't push, didn't ask questions. He just loaded up the truck, Max hopping into the back seat, and drove. The cemetery was quiet, the wind rustling through the trees. Tyler stood in front of Noah Bennett's headstone, his small hands gripping the framed picture they had taken weeks ago, of him, Lucas, and Max standing in front of the cabin. Lucas stayed back. This was Tyler's moment. The boy knelt, tracing his father's name. Then, in a voice that was soft but sure, he whispered, "I'm okay, Dad." A beat. Then, even softer, "Uncle Lucas takes care of me now." Lucas closed his eyes. Because that was the moment he had been waiting for. Not for Tyler to call him Dad. Not for some big, dramatic declaration. Just that. A quiet acceptance. A trust that hadn't come easy. Max let out a small, content huff, settling beside Tyler. And Lucas? Lucas just stood there, hands in his pockets, letting Tyler say goodbye his own way. Letting the kid finally step out of the past and into a future where he was wanted, where he was home. At its core, this story is about love, healing, and the power of chosen family. It is a testament to the idea that family is not just about blood, it's about who stays, who fights for you, and who refuses to leave when things get hard. Tyler Bennett, a child who had lost everything, was on the verge of disappearing into a system that often forgets the most vulnerable. His silence wasn't just grief, it was a defense mechanism, a way to survive in a world that had never felt safe. But then came Max, a loyal companion who never stopped searching for his boy, and Lucas, a man who had spent years running from his own past, only to realize that his greatest purpose wasn't behind him, it was standing right in front of him. Through patience, trust, and the quiet strength of love, they built something unbreakable. Tyler found a home. Lucas found redemption. And Max? He proved that some bonds are so strong, not even death can break them. This story is a reminder that sometimes the family we need most is the one we never expected to find. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.